Hello, I'm Danny Alexander, Vice President for Policy and Strategy at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and it's a great pleasure for me to be with you today at this T-Edge conference. And I would like to share with you my thinking and the AIIB's thinking about infrastructure for tomorrow, about the kind of infrastructure that our world is going to need for the next few decades of our development, and particularly about the key trends of digitization and technology on the one hand, and climate change and green infrastructure on the other, and how those two things can come together to ensure that we have the kind of quality of development that our world needs. Of course, we see some important trends in infrastructure which show that we need fresh and new ways to think about how we solve these problems. Obviously, we hope coming out of the global COVID-19 pandemic, albeit that the experience of COVID and the economic consequences is very unevenly distributed across the world, and with new variants, the challenges are likely to persist. One of the consequences of the pandemic has been that global government debt levels have been elevated to historic highs as governments have rightly spent money to protect their societies from COVID. We have seen project finance transactions, of course, heavily impacted and reduced by the pandemic. On the other hand, we also see increasing appetite from investors for investments in digital and in renewables as key infrastructure categories. I want to explain why I believe that it's critical that as we think about infrastructure for tomorrow, that a key part is about infusing infrastructure with new technologies. And this requires if you like, a new mindset, a new way of thinking about the infrastructure that we're going to invest in. If you look at productivity, you see that infrastructure is lagging behind. There's a technology and productivity divide. More recently, especially since 2020, we see digital innovation, digital infusion being a trend that investors become more and more interested in. And of course, this is because there are significant benefits to infusing new technology into traditional infrastructure in terms of efficiency, in terms of climate related, in terms of being able to use infrastructure for multiple purposes, to forecast, to plan your maintenance, and so forth. And we see that new infrastructure is already heavily developing here in China and across the world. And there are therefore a lot of opportunities in future, not only for digital infrastructure in itself, the telecommunications networks and so on that are necessary to bridge the digital divides that sadly still disfigure many societies around Asia and beyond, but also to bring technology into roads, into railways, into healthcare, into water, into environmental protection, into the energy system, to make those systems work better, to be more efficient, to be more to reduce emissions, and so forth. I think this chart is really important because in thinking about infrastructure, or indeed other major projects, you have to think about every stage in the life cycle: the planning, the design, the finance, the construction, the operation, the maintenance, and then the recycling of assets at the end of their or repurposing of assets at the end of their lives. And as an infrastructure investment bank, we see huge opportunities for making better use of technology at every stage of the asset life cycle, in terms of planning the infrastructure that we need, designing, the use of digital twins as a way of building a full picture of the needs, of the impact of the project itself, to enable a lot of that assessment and thinking to be done remotely and using technology. Also gives an opportunity to infuse the best thinking about projects from all over the world into what you're doing. Likewise, through the construction phase, whether it's for safety, for efficiency, for monitoring, In AIIB's case, we apply very high standards to our projects. We expect every project to meet our environmental and social framework, which looks at what is the impact on the local environment? How do we manage and protect the environment from the impact of project construction, project development, and project operation? How do we make sure that affected people are dealt with in a proper and fair way, and have opportunities to complain if they see problems, and to be informed about how the project is going forward. And obviously, if people have to be resettled because of the project, then making sure they're treated properly in that process and compensated properly is hugely important. And so technology can help with all of those stages. And of course, once your infrastructure project is up and running, then project management, operation, monitoring, sensors and Internet of Things to ensure that we understand exactly what's going on, that we can predict the maintenance needs, and therefore making our maintenance work that much more efficient and effective. And through the project life cycle, the digital twin can be an asset, making sure that at every stage the operation and functioning of the project is properly understood. Infotech, AIIB's Infotech platform is able to deliver benefits to infrastructure, as I said, in every sector and across the asset life cycle. But of course, there are also challenges in this new way of thinking about and of implementing infrastructure projects. As with other sectors disrupted by technology, every aspect of how we think about what we're doing will be affected, and there are opportunities if we're able to make the right kind of changes, whether that's in terms of financing and the right financing structures, enabling a deeper understanding of the economics of projects, which makes sure that we can evaluate the projects better. We can really understand the benefits of the added value of technology, and across all the other stages of the process. So for AIIB, as a new multilateral development bank, so AIIB was set up in early 2016. Our now 104 member countries have contributed capital to the bank. We're an international financial institution like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or the IMF. So we have high standards of governance, we have high standards for our projects, we have a AAA credit rating, which enables us to pass the benefits of that on to our members. From the start, we've committed ourselves to being a lean, clean, and green financing institution. And that means that we have an opportunity to embed this new mindset into the way that we think about and choose the infrastructure that we are going to finance. So that means, for AIIB's point of view as a financier, we finance the adoption of infrastructure technology. We invest in the development of infrastructure technology also. That means investing in technology companies or funds that have a relevant focus on infrastructure. But more broadly, we need to think about this space as a developing ecosystem. We need to develop that ecosystem to facilitate commercial applications of technology in infrastructure. And that's a role that, as a multilateral development bank, we see AIIB can play an important role, given also our focus on Asia, and especially low and middle income countries in Asia. There are many opportunities to share best practice, to share experience, to help developing countries to leapfrog to the best applications of technology and to develop the hard digital infrastructure that is necessary to make that work. So let me give you a few examples of the kind of areas where AIIB has invested in this kind of crucial intersection between technology and infrastructure. On the one hand, investing in technology development, investments like the Sinovation Disrupt Fund, the Legend Capital Health Tech, Lightsmith Climate Resilience Partners, which is investing particularly in innovation related to climate change adaptation and resilience. The STIC Asia Infrastructure Innovation Fund. These are all investments through which AIIB is investing in the development of technology and the infusion of technology into these sectors. But then also through our investments in infrastructure projects, which is the bulk of our business, we're also able to ensure that the best technology is applied in those cases. I'll give you a few examples. In Liaoning, Green Smart Public Transport Demonstration Project is about electronic vehicles and smart transport for that city as it plans its own path to net zero. We've infused technology into the Guangxi-Chongzhou Border Connectivity Improvement Project to make the most of what is a substantial investment in roads and of cross-border connectivity there. In Uzbekistan, the Bukhara Water Supply Project, we were able to share experience showing how new water supply and sewerage developments could really be enhanced by technology. And by bringing that experience, we're able then to help the project sponsors in Uzbekistan to develop their project in a better, more effective way that was linked closely also to other objectives about climate, about public health, and so forth. Looking forward, there are some important trends this year and next year that we have in our minds. Obviously, in a sense, the focus of this discussion is that there's a growing trend to adopt technology in infrastructure, and that is, increasingly being picked up on, accelerated by COVID-19, but also by the climate imperatives that I'll come to next, and by the rapid urbanization in many parts of Asia. We're seeing more and more governments make technology-enabled infrastructure one of their priorities, especially in an urban setting. And in construction and maintenance, we're seeing technology already changing the way that people think about how to do that business. Institutional investors are increasingly adopting digital infrastructure and digital thinking. And we're seeing, especially in middle and high income countries in Asia, more and more investment vehicles being set up to accelerate this trend. And so that means we see huge opportunities in digitalization and decarbonization, in digital infrastructure, in smart cities, in energy efficiency, in electric vehicles, but also across other aspects of infrastructure, technology, and so forth. With more time, I would go into these things with more detail. But in a sense, perhaps the most important point to take away from this, I think, is that if we're really going to make infrastructure technology-enabled infrastructure a reality, then we do need a new mindset about how we think about infrastructure. We can make development more efficient. We can disrupt traditional infrastructure assets with new thinking, and indeed potentially create new infrastructure asset classes. And so we need to ask questions in each of these cases about how we leverage technology, about how technology can change the way these sectors work, and therefore, what are going to be the attractive opportunities going forward. Now, that leads me in a sense to the next part of what I wanted to talk about, which is to focus on green infrastructure, because perhaps the most important global trend is in relation to climate change. I've just returned from representing the AIIB at the COP26 talks in Glasgow, and that was really a very important event, because it showed the great awareness among global leaders of the need to do much more to tackle climate change. To keep the goal of limiting global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees alive is going to require action at a much greater scale than we've seen so far. We've seen 130 countries now committed to net zero or to carbon neutrality. In China's case, the commitment to peaking carbon emissions before 2030 and reaching net zero by 2060. Altogether, the countries that have committed to carbon neutrality represent over 90% of the world's GDP, and 90% of global carbon dioxide emissions. So how we then identify the right ways to deliver the finance and deliver the investments that are going to make that change happen is really important. And so AIIB, along with other multilateral development banks, is committed to making sure that all of our financing flows are aligned with the goals of Paris Agreement. We will align our financing for every project by the middle of 2023, and I suspect that's something that all investors will have to start thinking about in the years to come. We've also committed in AIIB's case that at least 50% of our investment will be specifically targeted at climate finance by 2025, and that covers both climate change mitigation, which is projects that help to reduce carbon emissions like renewable energy, like clean transport and so forth, but also climate change adaptation, projects that help to protect people from the effects of climate change, or that build in resilience to climate change into other kinds of projects. So the Glasgow Climate Pact, the outcome of the COP26 talks, resulted in many countries bringing forward more ambitious commitments. It also meant an acceleration of the timeline for future commitments. So countries will be expected to come back next year to COP27 in Egypt with new updated domestic ambitions. It was the first ever climate deal to explicitly plan to reduce coal consumption, which is a critical part of achieving these objectives. We also saw an important US-China joint declaration on enhancing climate action in the 2020s. That matters because the 2020s is the most important time to make these changes. The actions we take or fail to take during the 2020s will determine whether we can limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees or not. So this is not something that can be left for a few years. Action now, and ambitious action now, is really absolutely critical. But I would also say that that action has to be consistent with also maintaining the rightful path to greater development in the developing world. And so in a sense, climate change, climate action has to become the development story of the 21st century, marrying development and climate action, so that green development is the way that we help people to raise their living standards, to have a better life. I think is really critically important. And in that sense, this also has to bring together both the public sector and the private sector. And so multilateral development banks like the AIIB have a crucial role, not just in deploying our own capital. In AIIB's case, we expect to commit at least $50 billion to climate finance through this decade, but also mobilizing private sector finance. We saw in Glasgow commitments to financing firms with $130 trillion of assets, committing to transitioning the economy to net zero. But turning those ambitious commitments into real investments will take a lot of effort on the ground. And I think that's where multilateral development banks like the AIIB can really play a role. Of course, as we enter the recovery phase post-pandemic, there is an opportunity to really focus the recovery with a green investment focus. We see big opportunities also in electricity transmission and distribution, in renewable energy, in energy efficiency. And of course, achieving net zero will not be possible without considerable investments in energy efficiency. And all of those, to go back to the first part of the presentation, all of those goals can be substantially enhanced by the infusion of technology into the relevant infrastructure. There's a hugely important role for capital market development in this space. AIIB has invested already in several projects that help to develop green capital markets for Asia, but mobilizing the finance that's necessary for climate change mitigation, for climate change adaptation, is going to require new sources of information, increasing awareness of green investment in the capital markets, high quality information that prevents greenwashing. And so data providers like yours have a critical role to play also in making sure that investors who want to support green development, have the information necessary in order to do so. Likewise, you will see pressure through global value chains, especially the leading firms in global value chains will be pressured to lead the decarbonization of those value chains through things like imposing carbon prices, common standards. Again, data transparency is incredibly important. Then in common with technology, the urban setting, cities offer significant green and climate finance potential given rapid population growth and urbanization, whether that's in terms of urban mobility, integrated development, urban resilience. We are already seeing people across Asia suffering enormously because of climate-related weather disasters. We saw terrible flooding in China's Henan province in the summer of this year, and AIIB is supporting the redevelopment there, but redevelopment in a way that builds in resilience to future climate change also is critically important. I just want to zoom in quickly on China in this context. Although if one looks historically, the bulk of emissions have come from the United States and European countries. China today is the world's largest emitter with 28.6% of global emissions. But China has also made very ambitious targets to peak emissions and achieve carbon neutrality. That is a massive shift, and achieving carbon neutrality will affect every aspect of society, every aspect of the way we live. This is not just about how you generate your electricity, it's about how you use it. It's about every aspect of how we live our lives. And so we see the targets driving a lot of change, a lot of investment, important plans being announced, including for in this 5-year period for renewable energy. And so, if I may just finish by kind of summing this up, for AIIB, we've developed our strategy for the next decade based around the concept of infrastructure for tomorrow. Infrastructure for tomorrow means green infrastructure. It means technology-enabled infrastructure. It means mobilizing private sector finance at scale in order to achieve the broad impact that is needed. And of course, it means investing in connectivity and regional cooperation to support trade, cross-border investment, and so forth. And so I hope through this presentation, I've been able to show how our thinking about digital technology, infusing technology, investing in the development of technology, investing in climate technology, and projects which help to reduce emissions, to achieve the ambitious goals of our members, is really the driving force behind AIIB's investment strategy. That is infrastructure for tomorrow. We look forward to working with all of you to delivering these goals. And I hope that if this has captured your imagination, then you would be welcome to follow up with AIIB to see how we can work together in future. Thank you very much indeed for listening.